All right, good evening. We're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and welcome to Bringing Clean Energy Home, Lessons Learned from Electrifying 100 Homes and How You Can Make the Transition. My name is Abe Scar. I'm the director of Illinois PIRG. Illinois PIRG is an advocate for the public interest. We speak out for the public and stand up to special interests on problems that affect the public's health, safety, and well-being. And I'm serving as MC tonight. In a minute, I'll introduce our panel of speakers, after which you'll hear from them. And after that, we'll have some time for questions and answers. Before we get started, I want to make a couple of quick announcements. One, this is being recorded, and if you have to hop off at some point, it will be available on the Illinois PIRG website soon, if you want to catch the rest of the webinar or share it with others. I want to thank Elevate and Environment Illinois for co-sponsoring the webinar, along with us from Illinois PIRG. All of us, our organizations are doing important work, and we're going to put our websites in the chat if you're interested in learning more about any of our organizations. And then second, you'll see that as an attendee in the webinar, you're in listen-only mode. If you have a question, you can use, there's a question and answer function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And go ahead and put a question in there. You can do that at any point during the webinar. We'll be monitoring it. And when we get to the question and answer section, we'll select good questions we think will be of most interest to the group to discuss. And so with that, I'll introduce our speakers. So first, Angela Tovar is the Chief Sustainability Officer and Commissioner of the recently reconstituted Department of Environment at the City of Chicago. Before joining the city in 2020, Angela had over 15 years of experience in nonprofit administration, urban sustainability policy, environmental and climate justice, and community planning. She's going to provide us with a brief welcoming remarks and review some of the good work that she and her team are doing at the City of Chicago. And I see Melena's come off onto video. If Angela and Katanya, you should do that as well. Melena Hessel is the Illinois Director of Policy at Elevate, a national nonprofit organization headquartered in Chicago that seeks to ensure everyone has clean and affordable heat, power, and water in their homes and communities, no matter who they are or where they live. In her role, Melena focuses on putting recently passed climate legislation in Illinois into action. And she'll be sharing some of what Elevate has learned after electrifying 100 homes in Chicago. And Katanya Raby is a seasoned urban planner, artist, and activist, boasting over a decade of professional experience across nonprofit, government, and corporate realms. Currently, she leverages her diverse talents to bring communities impacted by environmental injustice together as the inaugural Greening America's Cities Fellow for the Bezos Earth Fund at the Chicago Community Trust. She's a proud mother of two, and tonight she's here to share her experience of retrofitting her Chicago home to be all electric. So that's the lineup of panelists we have. I'm very excited myself to hear from them. And so I will get out of the way and welcome Angela to say some welcoming remarks and share some of what the city's up to.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here this evening. And I'm really looking forward to not only hearing from my fellow panelists that are here tonight, but also just engaging in a dialogue. I know that there will be time for some Q&A later. And I'll just, before I jump into it, I'll just say, thanks in advance for your patience. I'm recovering from a pretty bad cold that I had over the weekend and feeling much better now. But I think you can tell pretty quickly from my voice that, I'm waiting for a little bit more healing to happen. I'm just struggling a little bit with the cold today. So thanks in advance for your patience with that. So again, just really excited to be here and wanted to begin and just frame the conversation by just saying how exciting we are in this moment, how exciting it is to be in this moment here in the city of Chicago, and not only to think about some of the policy direction that and where we're leading toward in terms of policy, but also to discuss, real life examples of the clean energy transition happening in our communities. And so really excited to hear from Elevate and the wonderful and just really thoughtful work that they've been leading across the city in different neighborhoods, across different building typologies, and across different neighborhoods, and also just the real life experience that Katanya brings as a homeowner. We're really grateful to have you all here in the city, and to really learn from your lived experience and also just your experience as Elevate in the community, working with so many different homeowners. And I'll just begin by saying, this is so exciting for us because, as you all know, we experience the real life consequences of climate change every single day, right? And we know that those consequences are becoming more frequent and more severe. I know we're all gathering today on a, balmy, 50-degree day here in February. And we know what the consequences of, this being 2024 and 2023 before that. And, really the last 10 years being the hottest years on record in history. And so, we need to make the transition. We have to transition to zero to low carbon energy future. And luckily, as we will demonstrate today with talking about the various technologies that we have in front of us, we don't have to wait. The technology is available now, and we can make the transition. So before we hear from Elena and talk about some of the work that Elevate's leading, I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of some of the work that the city of Chicago has been working on. It has been an incredible journey for us as a city. This work started, at least for this team, right? There have been many wonderful people who have worked on sustainability in the city in the past, but our journey now, right, begins back in 2022. And we as the city of Chicago really wanted to create a climate action plan that speaks not only to the urgency of, decarbonizing the city of Chicago and drastically lowering our carbon emissions, but really understanding the importance of equity in that conversation and the importance of driving equitable co-benefits, right? How can we, again, lower our emissions, but also really intentionally drive outcomes and benefits that our communities need now more than ever. And so we put forth this really ambitious plan that really centered the importance of equity, and again, really understanding that we have solutions that work for everyone. And that's so critical, right? As we think about this clean energy future, we have to design solutions so that we leave no one behind. And then from there, another exciting win that we celebrated in 2022, which was a primer to our decarbonization efforts as the city of Chicago, was that we passed something called the Energy Transformation Code. And what that does is it ensures that the city is using the highest efficiency standards that exist today, right? We wanted to update our code with the International Energy Code recommendations. We became the largest city in the United States to adopt that energy code. And the one exciting thing that came from that is that this ordinance requires that all new residential construction be electric ready. So we wanted to, again, set the stage for our future decarbonization efforts. And then as we begin to embrace decarbonization more as a city, another thing that we did is we put a call out to all of our colleagues here at the city of Chicago to say, decarbonization is critical to us. How does this show up in your own work? And we were able to work successfully with the Department of Housing. As you all know, Department of Housing, or as you all may know, the Department of Housing works across the city and works with many nonprofit housing developers and provides funding to make affordable housing viable in the city of Chicago. Any developer that works with the Department of Housing has to adhere to the department's architectural and design standards. And so one thing that I'm grateful for was because of that partnership and talking to the Department of Housing and some of our other departments about what actions we can take as the city, the Department of Housing made the policy decision to require all electric construction to qualify for affordable housing funding. So that means that any project that we, as the city of Chicago, funds and subsidizes will have to take on decarbonization measures. So we're really grateful for the leadership and work that the Department of Housing has been leading. And then going to the next slide, this one talks a little bit more about just our journey as a city related to our building decarbonization policy. That started back in 2021, and really even before then, we spent a great deal of time, and the collective group that is here now, when I say we, again, acknowledging that there have been other sustainability leaders that have worked here, but at least for the team that's here now at the city, our work dates back to 2020, and really having conversations across the city to say, what does building decarbonization look like to you? What are the barriers and opportunities? How can we really build and root ourselves in an economy that works for not only successfully transitions buildings, but also drives jobs and new opportunities for our residents? And so we spent a great deal of time talking to leaders across many different sectors to understand the opportunities within building decarbonization, and again, some of the barriers to success. And then from there in 2021, we invited some of those stakeholders back and we formed what we called the Building Decarbonization Working Group. And we spent about a year really working with people, and again, centering the conversation around equity, right? How can we design outcomes so that we leave no one behind in this process, right? And we came together over the course of the year, and then ultimately put forth 24 recommendations in a report to the mayor, which will lead to the thing that we're doing most recently, which is that a couple months ago now, we introduced in City Council something called the Clean and Affordable Buildings Ordinance. So we're very excited to put this forth. This is a ordinance that looks at new construction first, and it applies an emission standard that says that we cannot emit over a certain level, which in turn requires all new buildings to use heating and cooling and water heating and cooking sources that can meet this indoor emission standard, which today means that we would turn to electric appliances for the most part. There are some reasonable exceptions in the ordinance, recognizing that there are some technologies that do not have a zero to low emissions alternative now. But for the most part, all of the things that I've mentioned, the heating, the cooling, and things like your dryer, your cooking, right now there are an electric or a fossil fuel free alternative that we could point to. And so we would require those to move forward, adhering to the emission standard. So it's a really exciting time here at the City of Chicago. We've built a lot of really great foundational work through the Climate Action Plan and working with community leaders throughout the city to really say, this is about minimizing our reliance on fossil fuel. This is about lowering our emissions. And this is about doing that in an equitable way so that everyone in the city can, reap the benefits of the clean energy transition, and that we bring everyone along, and that everybody is thriving in a new clean energy economy. And so for us, those are also critical. And so we're very excited to continue to working on the projects that I mentioned, as well as the future passage of the Clean and Affordable Buildings Ordinance. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Milena, or maybe back to Abe.
Yeah, I'll take it for just a minute.
Okay, yes.
Thank you, Angela, so much.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us in general, and sorry you're getting over a cold. Appreciate you joining despite that. So it was great to hear from Angela about the efforts from the city and some of the policy measures. Melina's going to talk us through, implementation, how some of this work is already happening on the ground. So Melina, please take it away.
Thanks, Abe, and great to hear from you, Angela. Sorry, can you guys hear me? Okay, I got a note that I was muted.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So thanks, Dave. Great to hear from you, Angela. Excited to be here tonight. I think, Abe, you introduced Elevate as a nonprofit that believes everyone should have clean and affordable heat, water, and power in their homes and communities. And we do that by running a variety of clean energy and clean water programs. So while I'm the policy director here on Illinois Energy, but I'm here tonight really to talk to you about some of the great work my program team is doing in our building decarbonization program, mostly right here in Chicago. Next slide. So first, what is building electrification? Next slide. Okay. What that really means is retrofitting buildings like mine that have big natural gas, in my case, a boiler, to stop burning fossil fuel. So often that means changing out the systems buildings rely on for heat, for hot water, also dryers. My dryer, many of our dryers use natural gas, and of course, gas stoves. Now, I think the other thing I'll note is that we're often talking about, or at least me as a policy advocate, I'm often talking about getting all the way off gas, full electrification. But when we think about electrification, we can do partial or full electrification. There may be cases where it makes sense to electrify some uses, and at least in the short term, not others. Next slide. One of the key pieces of technology that we use to electrify these days is a heat pump. Many of you have probably heard about heat pumps, but a heat pump is really just an air conditioner that can run backwards. It's what allows us to actually heat buildings here in Chicago on electricity more affordably and very cleanly. And so there's I put a little diagram on this page about how heat pumps work, but it's just an air conditioner that runs backwards. It has a refrigerant that runs through it. When in the summer, an air conditioner works where when it's outside, that refrigerant releases heat and brings the cool refrigerant back into the building, and where it absorbs heat again, cooling the building. And heat pumps have a reversing valve that allows that air conditioner basically to run backwards. And so this is the heart of a lot of our electrification work, is this piece of technology. Next slide. And one thing that's really important to know, particularly here in Illinois and other places Elevate works like Michigan and Wisconsin, is that while heat pumps did not always work well in cold climates, the technology has advanced and they do today. They work great. And so the slide has some language from Mitsubishi's website talking about how their heat pumps can work all the way down to -5 degrees and -13 degrees. And basically they can work when it gets really, really cold. When I saw this, I thought, oh, this is marketing language. But I talked to my engineers and they're saying they see these cold climate heat pumps work at even lower temperatures some of the time. That this is the language that the lawyers agreed to, and that there are reasons to be cautious, but this technology works when it gets really, really cold, when you install it right and run it right. Next slide. And then I just wanted to highlight for everyone that building electrification is just sort of one plank in the whole that is building decarbonization. Another important piece to highlight, another important plank would be just energy efficiency. And this is really, I think, important to do in the context of building electrification, making your building as energy efficient as possible. But you also want to think about energy from renewable sources, and can even think about shifting the time of day that you're using energy to really, really lower your carbon footprint. Next slide. So with that sort of primer on what's electrification, how does it fit into building decarbonization, I'm going to switch to talking to you about what Elevate's done here in Chicago. Next slide. So first, in terms of our approach to building electrification, we've really, to the extent we can, focused on affordable housing, low-income communities, neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested, and with lower wealth populations, renters, seniors, vulnerable groups. I think these are the folks that we're trying to move as quickly as possible to cleaner, healthier technologies that can lower their energy burden. That's where we've been focusing our time and attention. That's the energy burden is the amount of money that somebody pays for their energy bill versus their overall income. So the more you pay, the higher percentage of your income that you pay for energy, the more energy burdened you are. And that making sure that we're keeping energy burden in mind and lowering folks, or at least not raising folks' bills, but generally we're trying to lower folks' bills, has been a key element of our work. Next slide. So our work to date, we've electrified over 400 units of housing in the 3 states we've been working in with our building decarbonization program, Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And here in Illinois, we've done more than 100 units, Abe. We've done 166. Most of these units have been on the south and west sides of Chicago, and there have been a range of multifamily units and mostly single family units. The slide said there are also like maybe 2 or 3 very, very small multifamily buildings, but the bulk of the remaining 66 units are single family. And I should mention that most of this work was done through ComEd's whole home electrification pilot. So we had great partners there in ComEd and the Chicago Bungalow Association for those projects. And for those projects, the households that participated were income qualified. And then I think, you know, it's also worth mentioning that I'm really excited and proud about what we've done. I think we've done more than almost anyone. But this is the tip of the iceberg. So we've been very focused on learning from these projects as they're the first electrification projects we do. And also really focused on trying to make sure along the way that the residents in the buildings and the homes that we're electrifying are benefiting. So there were no costs to residents. We were able to get grant money to make sure there were no costs to residents that participated. We prioritized complete electrification, so getting folks off of their gas bill entirely, because that was really critical to addressing the energy burden I mentioned, to eliminating their fixed gas charges. And everyone who participated, we screened up front to try and ensure that they'd see bill savings. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to talk for a second about our multifamily electrification. Actually 3 buildings we did here in Chicago at La Paz Place, which is a Bickerdike and affordable housing owned property in the city. So this was a very typical multifamily building in Chicago. One of the reasons we chose it was that it had previously been weatherized. So there'd already been a lot of work done to make sure that the electrical load was as small as possible, and then the building was as efficient as possible before we went in and tried to electrify it. That just makes everything work better. makes the project smaller and makes it easier. Also just makes the tenants more comfortable to begin with, that they don't have a leaky building. So this building had individual gas furnaces and stoves to start with, and then common hot water heaters and dryers. Next slide. And so for the electrification project, we took out those individual gas furnaces and we changed them to have individual heat pumps. So each building had an individual heat pump for their heat. The central water went from a typical gas hot water heater to a central heat pump hot water heater. And we also actually put solar on the roof of this building to help offset the bill costs for the owner. One thing I'll note is that in some of the very, very large building units, the 4-bedroom units in this building, our projections showed that their energy costs might stay the same rather than go down. So we also worked with Bickerdite to lower their rent to make sure that to pass on some of the savings basically from the solar to these larger units to ensure that they, along with all the other units, saw sort of a net positive bill impact. And the overall cost of the project was about $1.6 million. Next slide. So this can show you, this slide shows you both the bill and the carbon savings for both that we saw through this project. So you can see there were pretty significant cost savings to the residents. And one thing I forgot to add on the other from the previous slide is that residents actually added central sort of cooling in their unit, whereas before they were relying on window units or nothing. So we were able to get these cost savings even with the added cooling. Once you factored in the solar, there were cost savings to the landlord as well. And very significant carbon savings, 44% annually. So this was a pretty exciting and we think pretty successful project and a good example of the power of electrification, not only for multifamily buildings, but affordable multifamily. Next slide. And you can go ahead. So now I'm going to talk about our single family electrification, an example from our single family electrification program. This is a picture of one of the homes that we electrified in our program. The scope of the work included, well, you know what, why don't we go, maybe the one thing I'll highlight on this slide is that we expected to see 75 tons of carbon emissions reductions over the lifetime of the project. But why don't we go ahead to the next slide to get into more detail about the scope of work. So this shows the scope of work in a typical unit, not necessarily, these are round numbers. It's not the exact numbers that we saw, but the typical scope of work involves changing out what was often a gas furnace, or I believe always a gas furnace, to an air source heat pump, changing out the hot water to a heat pump hot water heater, changing the dryer and the stove. In these single family units, we typically did induction stove. I think the multifamily typically saw traditional electric stoves. And then an electrical service upgrade as well. So in order to load all these new electric loads onto the building, every single family, well, actually, I think every building, we serve needed an electrical service upgrade, and certainly every single family building did. And this is the one cost that I think these estimates were, these typical project costs were the estimates at the beginning of the project, and they were all pretty right on accurate, except I think the electrical service upgrades, the average cost might have been a little bit higher. So these aren't cheap. I will say though that these were upgrades in some of the oldest neighborhoods in the city and even the state. And for some of our residents, some of the most disinvested ones as well. And so I think this is a typical project cost for the city. I also think that, you know, I'm hopeful that some of these costs will come down, and that in some other jurisdictions and for some newer housing types, the electrical service upgrade in particular might be lower. I know it's maybe a quarter of this cost in Wisconsin. Next slide. But with all those costs, there's a real payoff. This is an actual before after estimated bill savings for an actual project scope. And you can see for this home, the resident was paying close to, I mean, $3,600 a year in energy costs, and those costs dropped rapidly after the retrofit. We're expecting them to be paying closer to $1,000 a month or a year, sorry. And I'm just gonna pause for a second and put my policy hat back on to say that, like, these two slides, both the cost and the benefit, are to me why it makes sense to build new homes to be all electric to start with. If you go back a slide for a second, Jordan. We don't want to, and maybe you can't, and that's okay. Okay, we don't want to build buildings that people like us have to come in and retrofit for thousands of dollars. It doesn't make sense. And if you go back to the resident savings, the cost savings for a resident, I think, speak to themselves. And I think when Katanya talks, she might tell you that it wasn't smooth to get to these savings for her. There was a little bump on the road. But I think that the residents we're talking to are getting there in the end, and that's really exciting. Next slide. So if you're interested in electrifying, next slide. First, I just want to share maybe some of the lessons learned from this work. I think the first thing that was immediately evident as we were going along is how important it is to insulate and air seal first. You want to electrify a building that is as efficient as possible. It just doesn't make sense to electrify first and do the energy efficiency second. The project scope will be more expensive if you do it that way. Make sure that you weatherize your home first. The next thing is that these projects are not plug and play. And what I mean by that is, so I mean, you can see behind me, I have a boiler heat. Our typical energy efficiency programs today, they take out a boiler and they put in a new, more efficient boiler. It's more complicated when you're taking out one piece of technology and putting, like, a furnace, as we were doing in many of our buildings, and putting in a totally new kind of equipment. You might need to go into walls. You are certainly likely to have an electrical service upgrade if you're in an old home like we have here in Chicago. Something to consider is do you have ducts? I know that for our programs, we have been prioritizing homes that already have ducts first because it makes this a lot easier. There are heat pumps that are ductless, but there's just less overall work in the home when that duct system is already set up. Another thing to consider, heat pumps can add cooling where none existed before. I think this is really exciting and important as we're adapting to a hotter and hotter atmosphere and a hotter and hotter Chicago. Cooling is going to become increasingly important to our residents here in Chicago and Illinois, across the Midwest. And so I think the cooling aspect of heat pumps is exciting. It's also something that will definitely make your electric bill go up, which is my next point. The electric bill itself will always go up in these projects. You're adding more electric load. But what we saw time and again is that with carefully designed scopes, we could do this in ways that not only was the increase in cost less than the decrease in the gas bill, but often it was a lot less. And where that might not be the case, we got that multifamily building. You saw where the central load would have gone up over the finish line by adding solar. Next slide. So if you are looking to go electric, the federal tax credits and rebates that are already here in the case of tax credits or are coming in the case of rebates are really exciting and provide a lot of support for making this transition in the near term. And their best resource I found for looking at this is the Rewiring America's incentive calculator, and I've included a link to that on this slide, and would encourage folks to check it out. Although those rebates have to be implemented through the state, and they're not necessarily available right this second today. Next slide. There have also been recent RFPs, both by ComEd and the city of Chicago, looking for folks to help run electrification programs. I don't think the results of either of those have been announced publicly, and I do expect they're both income qualified. But I'm really excited about both these programs and how they're going to work to really help further drive this transition and get more folks in Chicago the benefits that the participants in our programs have already seen. But there are also programs that do already exist today that I would encourage you to look at, specific through ComEd. If you're in Northern Illinois, Ameren, if you're in most of Southern Illinois, for energy efficiency and all sorts of there are rebates for heat pumps, for example, through many of these programs. So I take a look there. And then ultimately, you want to probably start talking with an HVAC contractor. You want to make sure it's a contractor that is comfortable with and has worked with cold climate heat pumps before, and you probably want to get multiple bids. One way to find folks, I know ComEd has contractor lists. I also know that Mitsubishi is the manufacturer of the cold climate heat pumps Elevate uses, and they have lists of HVAC contractors that they know are comfortable with and familiar with their technology. And so I'm sure manufacturers are a way to help identify contractors as well. And I think that might be my last slide. So look forward to answering questions later.
Thank you, Milena. And we're about to zoom in even further with Katanya sharing her experience of electrifying her home. Just want to put one more reminder for folks, if you got questions, please use the question and answer function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Already been one question I was able to answer in the in writing there, but hopefully we'll have a little bit more time at the end to talk about some questions. So if you do have a question, please use that function. And with that, I will hand it off to Katanya.
Thanks, Abe. And thank you, Melina, for giving the background on all of the things that happened before, in the home, so that I don't have to go through all of that. But I will share just really quickly my experience. Took about 1.5 years to complete from the first assessment of my home through like the final construction portion. There were a variety of different elements that needed to be taken care of prior to the installation of the equipment. My house is over 100 years old. I do live in a typical Chicago style bungalow, brick home. And there were some insulation issues. There were, my electrical wiring was not up to snuff for these new devices. And so the team came in and took a look at all of those things, as well as they ran a few tests to see how efficient my doors and windows were, seeing how much energy was being just lost because I have older doors and windows. So I have a couple of videos and pictures to share with you guys, just of like those processes, just because they were kind of interesting. I had never seen these kind of tests being done before, so I thought it would be interesting to share them here. So this video is and anyone from Elevate, Melina, if you want to share what this device, the actual name of it is, please feel free to jump in. But this video shows a Jordan, if you want to start the video, it shows a like a puffer smoke test where you hold it up to a crack. So this is one of my this is the back door that leads out to a back porch. And so you could see actually the light coming through the crack of the door, but there was also this smoke puff test thing that further proves that there are some air seeping through the cracks, and they pointed those out by using these tools. I think the next slide might show the blower door test, if you want to go to the next video. So this is an image of my front door, showing this really interesting tool that I had never seen before, where they seal around the front door, and then there's this fan that essentially sucks out all of the air. Of course you can still breathe. It's not really taking out the oxygen, but it's basically trying to create a seal so that puffer test device can be more accurate and show where any leaks are with the doors and the windows. And so this fan down there was sucking out the air from inside the house. I think the next image shows what it looked like on the outside. If you want to go to the next. Yeah, so that's the outside. And then the next video, this is an actual video of the fan in motion. So I thought it was pretty cool. So those are tests that they did initially to kind of assess where my house it was and how efficient it was. And also to give a baseline so that when they began the process to install the new heat pump and all the other appliances, they would have a sense of like how far my energy had come. And I think that was pretty cool to see as well. And the next video, and this is the final video, I believe, this shows where the team came in to do basically insulate my house properly. And my kids and I joke about it because we think of it like a kill room. And I don't know if any of you have ever watched Dexter, but they put up a lot of plastic, basically to protect the furniture and the finishings and all of that stuff throughout the house. But they did a process of drilling in all of the exterior walls where insulation wasn't present to install the foam insulation. They also installed insulation in the attic as well, where it hadn't been properly installed, which actually was helpful because I had been getting ice dams on the roof, and I didn't understand what was going on. And now, so with the help of this program, there were other issues that were going on with my house that were actually addressed. So I was very thankful for that. So Jordan, if you want to go ahead and play this video, I think it's kind of fun to watch. So this is like my kitchen. Everything is moved to the center of the room. This is my son's bedroom, the bathroom. This is another area, and then the dining room. So everything was just kind of like pushed to the center of all of the rooms. And like I said, they just kind of like walked around and drilled holes throughout all the walls and placed the foam insulation. I just thought that it's interesting as a homeowner, or anyone who's interested in doing this work, to know what the visuals are, because I had no idea that this is what was going to be happening. So like I said, there was construction that was taking place for about a year and a half. A group of plumbers came through, a group of electricians. Then you got the HVAC specialist. And so they all kind of came in, at different points, to do the work that was needed to be done to make sure that the system is working properly. And so my experience with the system, I've had it this is my second winter with it. And it works really well. We're very comfortable. It doesn't feel any different from having gas heat. The main difference with having an electrified house is really the range. My induction stove is a beautiful stove. I love it. So not cooking on fire was a transition, but actually, I'm happy with it. Like, all of my food comes out really, better quality actually, because it's cooking more evenly now. I mean, unless you're like some kind of chef that's preparing to do a flambe or, something special, I don't see a real need to have a gas stove anymore. And even my baking is actually coming out a whole lot better. Plus the induction stove is an air fryer. So, it's got a lot of cool functions that your typical gas stove doesn't have. So I would say overall that I'm very happy with the transition. It was very scary, of course, going from gas to electric, because, in Chicago, we're all like aware of how cold it gets, and, that fear of not having a backup source. But I mean, at the end of the day, if there is a power outage, your furnace is going to go out anyway because it's running off of electric too. But I guess just, also knowing that you could light the pilot on a stove is helpful too. But the real point that I'm trying to make is you can still, live just as comfortably as you had been with gas. Just making sure also to invest in a generator, I think, is a smart way to go about handling those misfortunes of having some kind of power outage. I've not had that experience in my community, thank goodness, but you never know. So just, I would say be prepared for that. I think that's really all I have to share. I'm happy to answer questions too, because I know that there's probably plenty just from, sitting in this space of having gone through this process, but yeah.
Thank you, Katanya.
Sure.
And we'll do a little question and answer here, but once again, I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists for sharing their experiences and perspectives. I can share just on what Katanya was saying as well. For the fear of a power outage, goes back to Melena's earlier point of a well-sealed and insulated home. If you maintain a well-insulated home, it actually doesn't take a whole lot to heat and cool your home, and it can maintain its temperature for a long time. So just to highlight, we had a couple questions that we were able to answer in the chat. The baseline year for the City of Chicago's emission standard was 2017. When Milena referenced older homes, how old that was, many homes more than 100 years old. And we have a couple open that we may not be able to answer live because they're technical, but appreciate people asking specific questions. So I'll just read them out. And if anybody does know, please answer. But otherwise, what we'll do for folks is make sure we get these answers posted to our website when we post the webinar video. So one was for an electrical upgrade on a 2-flat, would you expect that each unit would need 200 amps or would 100 amps be enough? I asked Milena this in the chat. She said she needs to check in with her engineers to be able to answer that. So unless there's another engineer expertise on our panel, I think we'll have to get back to that. And then I don't know if anybody can answer the insulation of the walls with brick walls. I don't know if we're able to answer that live, or we need to also post that one.
I think that was about Katanya's home.
Right, because they drilled to get insulation. And was there any examples of brick walls or do folks
like
examples of brick walls?
Like brick on the inside?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of my walls on the inside are all drywall, so it was easy to get in between the drywall and the exterior brick. So I wouldn't know anything about insulating brick inside.
We'll see if we can get a better answer for that on our website. It may just be instead of drilling through drywall, you need to like remove a couple bricks to get access to inside the walls. All right, so I think we can be able to, now we've got a third question in the chat, or excuse me, in the Q&A. The ductless heat pumps. I think this directed to Milena if you want to take it, but if anybody else wants to add in to talk about ductless heat pumps, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think those are also often called mini splits. And you end up with sort of little units in each room. They definitely exist. And I think, with it is just a little more work to like take out a radiator and put the mini split in than it might be to just attach a central heat pump to a building that has those ducts already. But it's definitely doable, and I think we've done it in other states. The programs we've run here have been focused on furnace buildings because those are easier to start with.
And I can add, I also have a boiler and radiators in my home, and started looking into, I think the technology is not as far along as with the air source, the heat pumps that replace radiators, but there are heat pumps that also do the same work as boilers. And I had to replace mine a couple of years ago, wasn't able to make the switch to electric at the time. So I've got some useful years left on the life of my boiler, and I'm hopeful that by the time I'm ready to replace it, maybe it will be going with ductless mini splits, but maybe there will also be an option that can maintain the hydronic system I have in my household. So I think that's all the questions. Oh, there was one in the chat.
There are two in the chat actually.
Okay.
And I can try to take them because I think they might be about my presentation.
Please.
So the first one was, is there no way to closely estimate the increase in electrical usage for a single home electrification project? And actually, we definitely did do that very carefully for each of our homes. I mean, no modeling is perfect, but I think that is possible, and not only possible, important to size the project right and get it done well. So I hope that answered the question, Rob. And then I think why, Sue, you asked, are there any net savings on energy costs after electrification? And there were in all of our projects. And I don't know, so Jordan, if you could pull those slides back up, why, so I'm happy to talk to you further, but I don't know, Katanya, if you wanted to speak to that at all either. I know you had a
Yeah.
bump road.
I mean, yeah, I meant to make mention to that. In the first winter, it was a little bit of an adjustment period for Elevate and for me. I think we all had to understand, like, you know, the rate change with ComEd, because there's different rates for depending on the type of service you have. And because I was transitioned off of gas and fully onto electric, that rate change request hadn't been made. And so I was still paying at the normal rate. And my electric bill was astronomical and incredibly scary. However, Elevate made everything right. And then we, you know, moving forward, the bill was very reasonable. It was definitely less than if you combine the total from, you know, what my typical electric bill would have been prior to the renovation plus the cost of my gas, which was, I would say on average somewhere around $350 to $400 a month, depending on how cold it was. And then if, you know, once it's, I transitioned, I would say that my electric bills are like in the wintertime specifically around $250 or less. So like this past December bill was like, or maybe somewhere December, January, it was like $250 something. And I think that's because we had like a couple of cold snaps. And then the heat pump has two like levels of heating. Like there's your base level where the heat pump, and I think Milena explained, like, you know, the process, like the ability for the heat pump to be able to handle below zero temps, which is true, but there's also this additional supplementary heat coil that in the event that it's just like way too cold for the heat pump to really keep up in a way that you need it to, it'll kick in, but it also adds a bit more of a cost to your electric bill. But in general, like I would say, like we've been very comfortable. And I think we might have had to kick on the supplementary heat, and we don't do it. The system does it on its own. It kicked on maybe, you know, twice in the last couple months. So it's not been too bad.
Thank
And
you.
actually on the subject of like, when it gets really cold or when you're like, you were talking about your electricity going out as a risk. I was talking to our engineer about this past polar vortex and whether we got any complaints. And we did not, which I was sort of really excited to hear. But he noted to me that, well, we didn't get any complaints from our electrified building. Elevate's office, which is on gas heat, it got too cold for the boiler to work. So, you know, I think there was, I mean, no, it wasn't the boiler, I think it was like the pipes or something. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not the engineer. That's why I can't answer the AMP question. But, you know, I think his point was really that like in extreme temperatures, it's hard for equipment generally, which is important to remember, I think. But yeah, we didn't get complaints that from this past polar vortex cold snap, which was really exciting to hear.
All right, so it's my job to wrap us up on time, and there are some more good questions coming in. Sorry we didn't have a chance to get to all of them, but we'll work to include questions and answers when we post this on our website. I want to thank Angela, Milena, and Katanya again for spending their time with us this evening, sharing their experience and their expertise. Thank Elevate, Environment Illinois, and Illinois PIRG for sponsoring tonight's event, and for everybody for joining and asking good questions. And we'll see folks again online in the future. Thank you.